Well, welcome to the Storied Outdoors. My name is Brad Hill, alongside my good friend and co-host Brian Gill. In this episode, we're joined by Todd Henrikson. Todd is a pro cycling director for Athletes in Action, a former pro cyclist himself, having raced for 12 years from elite mountain biking to professionally in road cycling. In 2012, launched his ministry to pro cyclists with Athletes in Action. Todd currently resides in Boulder, Colorado, but is in the process of moving to Spain in 2022, along with his wife, Tabitha, and 4 young kids, all under the age of 7. 4 young kids. I'm going to repeat that, all under the age of 7. That is no small feat, my friend.
That's an episode in itself right there.
Yeah. Talking about we always say adventure. That sounds like an adventure. But Todd, thanks so much for enjoying us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be on with you guys.
So Todd, you came from the cycling world. How did you get into cycling?
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and just urban sprawl, as you can think of it. And there was really not much like just outdoor stuff to do. I grew up playing all these team sports. I'm a really small guy. I'm 5'6". I barely weighed 100 pounds when I was younger, but I played everything except football. But I was 12 when my buddies in our neighborhood, we were like, you know what? There's some mountain bike trails. There's this mountain bike trail system called Soap Creek Trails, right about a mile or 2 from our neighborhood. We went out there in our Huffies and no helmets and rode these trails. And I tacoed, which is like you bend I crashed, and it's called tacoing your wheel. Like it literally bends and it can't go through the frame. And so I walked home. It took us I forget how long it took me to walk home. I think it was like an hour or 2 to walk home. By the time I crashed, I was probably like 4 or 5 miles away from home. And I somehow fell in love with it. And so all my buddies were like, let's do this again. So we all got bikes, or they all got bikes. Their parents gave them the money to pay for a mountain bike because bikes just aren't cheap. And my parents really, I don't know, frugal, stringent, conservative. They're like, you have to go earn it. You got to go earn it.
My man was mowing grass.
So I mowed lawns. My dad's like, well, so you start a business.
How you do it?
So I was 12. I started a lawn mowing business and bought my first mountain bike, a GT Zascar, 1996, a hardtail, RockShox fork. I was so pumped and I earned it. I paid $600 for it. And we started mountain biking. And then how I love sport. I just loved to compete, but I hated practice. But man, what I realized is that I loved riding. I loved being outside. Being on that field in baseball or in the swimming pool or on the track or on the soccer field. I'm like, I want to go somewhere. Like once I realized, oh my gosh, my mind expanded that I could just travel somewhere on a bike. And I just fell in love with the training. And then once we got in our first race, which is what I love to do, I love to compete. So the games, the match, whatever it might be, was more exciting for me. So once I like raced my mountain bike, I was absolutely hooked. And so I raced in mountain biking, which it was like in the peak of it. It was in 1996 to 2002. Mountain biking here in America was just like exploding, like huge sponsors, just money towards it. The industry was towards it. There's outside companies that were just putting a whole bunch of cash towards it. And I did that until I was 18, went to world championships when I was a junior, and traveled all over the country. By the time I was in high school, like I was just racing all over. So it was an awesome experience, and then switched to the road shortly thereafter.
Like? Change from mountain bike to road.
Yeah. I mean, the training necessarily wasn't a ton different. It was just, now I was dealing with tactics, teams, and understanding what that was like. So just mountain biking, I mean, you go off the start line and it's just full on sprint to the single track. Like it's almost like kind of fight to make it down to that first trail within the first 5 guys or so. And then things would spread out. In road cycling, it's like, you're not sprinting off the line because the race is 5 hours or 100+ miles. And so just learning how to race on the road was a new thing, but like over time, within a few years, because the fitness was there. So just learning how to do that, and then raced, really extensively, and raced in Europe. And then a couple years professionally on the road. Yeah.
Man, that's
in my
incredible.
early 20s.
My son is 6 years old, and we played baseball for the first time this year. And at the end of the season, I told him, I said, buddy, if you want to play again next year, I'll get you a new bike. And he said, well, I don't know. I really was kind of hoping we would do more bike riding than baseball. So he may be on that same trajectory as you are. It seemed like you started pretty young.
Yeah. I mean, I started at 12, but like our kids, like I said, they're all under 7, or Brad mentioned they're all under 7. So we've got 3 boys and a girl. They love it. They all love it. So my 6-year-old, my oldest, who's, his name's Logan. He just rips on his bike. I mean, just loves it. But to be honest, man, being involved in this ministry with pro riders and then doing it personally, cycling is just dangerous, man. It's like, if as a parent, you're kind of like, man, these guys are riding on the road every single day with traffic, and that's not including the dangers in the race. And so there's a level of reservation of, do I really want my kid to scream down a mountain in the Alps in the rain at 50 miles an hour? Like there's just, and that's not including every single day, Monday to Friday, outside of the race, training for 4 or 5 hours with traffic and cars, so it's,
I was thinking about that as a parent watching the tour, this past week, or a couple of weeks ago. And I'm thinking about that as a parent watching these young men who are, Tadej Pogacar is 22, right?
Yeah.
Watching those guys descend out of the Alps and the Pyrenees at these unbelievable rates of speed, especially coming off of like Mount Ventoux, which has 2 switchbacks, and they are just blazing. I'm like, man, if that was my kid, I would be like in stitches right now.
Right. You're like, please don't go off the edge of the mountain, please. That would be great.
Yeah. And then you see the crashes, and you're just cringing for those young men. Man.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching the tour years ago. Jonathan Vaughters is a team director for this American team called EF. And he's trying to explain to an American audience on NBC Sports about, people here in the US, right? I'm from Georgia. Like it's college football, right? Like UGA, I went to UGA, like what you shave your legs and wear spandex? Like, who are you? You're from Mars, right? So cycling, especially where I'm from in the South and where you guys live as well in Alabama, it couldn't be further from the culture. So he said this line, which I explained to people. I said, he says, these guys are going down this mountain or in a sprint finish. Okay. They're going 45 miles an hour in a flat sprint stage. He says, imagine taking off your clothes, getting in your underwear in your car, opening the door and jumping out at 45 miles an hour down the road, and see how it is. He's like, they're wearing modified underwear, and all they have is a helmet. And that's what the, crashing is like on a road bike at that type of speed. And I was like, yeah, totally. You just get shredded,
and then they get up and get another bike and get back on and keep going.
Yeah. It's nuts, man. They're crazy. I mean, it is a, as much as you would think, culturally, you think of like, they're shaving their legs, wearing spandex. These guys in cycling are some of the hardest, most persistent, determined people you will ever meet in your life. It's insane. It's just, I mean, there's a guy involved that's just broke his ankle. He's like riding on his bike with the boot on, like I did the same thing in my career. Like, oh, you break your collarbone, you're on the bike the next day on your trainer with one arm, right? On your stationary trainer. So it's just like, I'm not resting. I'm going to keep going. Right. So if you crash, you're like, oh, I'm getting back on my bike. Like, I'll be fine.
Geraint Thomas, when he fell and dislocated his shoulder, the cameras caught him saying, put it back in. And they put his shoulder back into place, and he got back on his bike and finished the tour, because that was early in the tour. I was just like, these dudes are the toughest dudes you'll meet. I promise.
Yeah. And then one of the Spanish guys, Henrikson, or who was it? One of these guys broke both of his elbows in that big crash with the sign, the lady the whole Peloton crash, broke both of his elbows and goes and finishes the stage. And I'm thinking about, like, how in the world would you wide with your handlebars. So yeah, tough.
Well, speaking about that, tell us about your experiences, man. Let me get this right. You had to learn to walk twice relearn to walk twice by the age of 21. Is that?
Yeah.
Those are directly related to bike incidents.
Well, the first one wasn't directly related to a bike incident. I was crossing the street at night with my family, and across the street, didn't see this car and got hit by a car at 7.
Oh my goodness.
I'm a small guy now, and I was just a little nothing.
My son Liam is a little guy, and he's 7. And
so I got hit, broke my femur. I flew like 30 feet and thankfully didn't die. But I was in a hard body cast, which it doesn't exist anymore. But this is what it was like. This was like early 90s. I had a hard cast. So think about, maybe you guys broke an arm when you were younger, wrist or something. I had a hard cast from right below my chest down both of my legs, and I had a bar that connected my legs together. And I lived in my parents' basement in this reclined, like this lounge chair. Had to go in a bedpan to go to the bathroom. And I was in this cast for 6 months. And so everything atrophied. My legs just completely atrophied. And so I had to learn and to be honest, my physical therapist, I would cry, and I was a tough kid, but I just cried every single session. And that lady pushed me so hard at 7. She wouldn't allow me to give up. And to be honest, it was interesting of thinking about cycling, right? Is your legs, right? It's your strength in your legs. And that physical therapy at 7, my leg that I broke was stronger than my other leg because of the therapy. And so it's just, unique how the Lord works. But that was the first time the Lord really saved my life. And then the second one was at 20. I was coming down this descent after a race. It was a point-to-point race up in Johnson City, Tennessee, up Roan Mountain. The race finishes on a summit climb, and I did really well. I got 3rd in the race, and you had to ride, I think, 40 miles back. And it was this crazy how it finished.
Wait! You just raced, and you got to ride your bike back?
Yeah, it was a short race because the climb was so intense. It was a pretty short, I forget, when I say short, maybe 50, 60 mile race or something. And so how they set it up, and you had to get back to your car. And this is a local race, not a professional, big time event.
You didn't ride the bus down the hill is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not riding the bus down here. There's no team car waiting for me. And there's traffic as well. So in a local cycling race, they don't have the money to shut down the whole highway. And so why I say that is, as I was coming down after the race, and it was this the finish, it was about a mile at 12%. So going up, right, finish, and then turn around and go down. And it's you're just going faster, 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 faster. And there was no caution signs on this right-hand sweeping corner. I thought was a sweeping corner. I was going about 45 miles an hour. And growing up in Georgia, I'd always go to the North Georgia gaps up in Ellijay and Dahlonega. I knew how to descend from my mountain bike background. I was confident on my bike.
Oh yeah.
And so I knew if there was a 35 mile an hour sign, caution, right turn, it's a sharp turn, I could go about 10 over. And so there was no sign. So I'm going 45 thinking no problem. And it was no joke. It was a 15 mile per hour hairpin, 90 degree hairpin. And I'm screaming pretty much to go off the mountain. And I look up, and there's a Ford Explorer coming up the other side of the road. And I'm slammed the brakes, skipped on my back for about a second, and almost went under the car, but hit the front wheel well, and hit it with my back basically. And my back just had this accordion compression. I broke my back, all these compression fractures. My lower lumbar, L1 to L5, broke 12 different spots.
Oh my gosh.
And I just, I'm laying there in the middle of nowhere. It took an hour for the ambulance to come. But God, that circumstance at 7, my dad was going to pick me up out of the road. Imagine your father, right? Both you guys are dads. Imagine that's your son. My dad when I hit that car at 7, my femur is the largest bone in your body. Your femoral artery goes right below that. And I cut, mine was clean through. And they said, my dad was about to pick me up, and it was a July 4th fireworks show. And these ladies called 911, and the firefighters and ambulance were there within like a couple minutes. And they screamed at my dad, "Don't pick him up. Don't pick him up."
Because the bone could sever the artery.
The bone would sever the artery, and I would have bled internally that day at 7. And God spared my life at 7. And this happened at 20. There's a guy joyriding his Goldwing motorcycle up in the mountains. He sees the whole thing, and I'm laying there, and I'm conscious. The blessing was I didn't hit my head, so I had no TBI. My bike is shattered. An aluminum bike is literally like in 10 pieces.
Whoa.
But my body isn't as bad as it should have been, and I'm conscious. And I see this guy. He kind of looked like Santa Claus. I just remember his face, and he's like, "Don't move. Be really still. Can you move your fingers? Can you move your toes?" Which I could. And he's like, "I'm an EMT."
Whoa.
And I'm like, what? What just happened? Like, you're an EMT and I don't see an ambulance. And this guy
You're not wearing EMT clothes.
Yeah, he's got his leathers on and just like chilling.
Is that standard regulation outfit
he just kept me calm and conscious. And the Lord, like, again at 20, was just like, "I have you. Like, I've got you. Like, I'm not, I'm not going to let you go." And it was those moments like were just, for me, foundational to know that God had this purpose in my life. And it at 20, even in that moment, I was far from Jesus, like absolutely almost like rejecting him at this point in my life and my faith. And so that was a wake up call for me as well, of God's faithfulness when I really didn't deserve it. That he spared me. And I'm like, God, okay, what do you, this is 2 times in a row that in my life by the age of 21. And I mean, I had to learn with both times at 7 and at 20, like learning how to walk again with a walker. Like, I'm literally an old person walking down, but going back to what these cyclists do and how they operate, I rode my bike with my back brace. Like, that's how,
just up on a trainer.
Kind of like, no, but even out on the road, like,
whoa.
I did it on the trainer, and it's like, "Hey doc, like, can I ride?" And he's like, "Sure, man, you're going to be in a lot of pain, but you can't break it again."
Bro, I bet that was a sight.
So, I was like, I think I wore a wife beater white t-shirt, instead of my cycling jersey, because the brace was so much thicker, right? So my Aero, really tight fitting cycling jersey just wouldn't fit. So I wore these like undershirts, like a lot. God, I forget what size I got, but I put that on with my bike shorts, and I looked, just a weirdo. Out there training again and trying to come back, which I did. It took me about a year, but came back and got a pro contract I got my first pro contract a year after that accident.
Wow. So, after that. So what all did you have to do? What was that road like, after you break your back initially?
Yeah. Physical therapy again. And, like I had at 7, and then, continue to do that, and just a ton of like plyometric exercises and everything outside of physical therapy. And I still have issues with my back to this day. So, and I had issues the last few years I raced because of that accident. But yeah, I was just dealing with a whole bunch of issues, from knee stuff to your back is like, it's pretty wild. When I broke it, like I could move my fingers and toes, but couldn't lift my legs, couldn't lift my arms. It literally was like, it's just such a core stabilizer for our bodies. And I didn't really realize that until it was broken. But it just took a long time. And it was a lot of frustration, a lot of, just almost anger.
I was going to ask,
like, it just took a while.
You're laying in the hospital bed a couple of days, how long was that, and what was going on in your mind then?
Yeah. I, like I said, I wasn't walking, like I was a Christian, but, I was not walking with Jesus at all. And so, to be honest, that was one of the happiest moments in my life at that point. Because I had this like insane amount of gratitude, and thinking of knowing I was fully conscious the whole time and knew exactly what happened. I remember seeing the car. I remember hitting the brakes. I remember hitting the car. I remember laying there on the road. Wow. I never blacked out. So I was conscious the whole time, and I was in like the most extreme pain imaginable. I'm yelling at the EMTs to give me morphine in the ambulance when they finally showed up. And, but I remember being there in the hospital for, I think it was like 5 days before I went home. And then I was just laid out on my back for, I forget how long, a long time. And I just remember being really grateful that I was alive. Like that was it. It was just like, I'm just thankful to still be here. I cannot believe I've had 2 life-altering moments and I'm still here. Like, this is just ridiculous. And so I remember journaling, and it was a good wake-up call, for me. But here's the sad part is, like, a couple years later, I'm back to where I was. I was back to just almost the same ego, the same self-reliance. And I look back on that season, I'm just like, wow, Lord, like we're fickle people. We're fickle people. We all do this, right? We all think we could do life without God. And so even as a Christian, it was just a wake up call of how quickly God might be really faithful in some season. And you're like, oh my gosh, man, Lord, I cannot believe you did this. And the time goes on and things get better and you just get comfortable. And it just was a reminder that I can just forget. We can forget God's faithfulness, God's grace, God's mercy. And I still am reminded of that today, of just like, man, I can forget so often. And so I wish I had this story of like, it took me a few years to God re-transform my life after that accident, that he just radically changed me at 23. But it was a wake up call, but it wasn't long lasting. That's what was the sad part.
So what happened at 23?
I was racing really well. As an endurance sport, your prime is when you're basically close to 30. Mm-hmm. So I'm on this trajectory of like being one of the better, they're called under 23 riders. So it's like 19 to 22 years old. I was one of the better riders in that category, and kind of like I was a professional, and you're just kind of like knocking on the door at that point. But where I was spiritually was just, I was dealing with a ton of sin issues in my life. And I thought that God couldn't really accept me anymore. I was damaged goods. And I even had a lot of shame, even after that accident, having this kind of epiphany, like, wow, God, like, this is so amazing. And then like a year or two later, I'm just like back to where I was. And just felt so much shame and guilt and conviction that I just stopped everything spiritually in my life, any discipline, church, prayer, reading my Bible, community, just nothing, because I felt that I couldn't come home. I use that analogy. I believe that coming to Jesus is coming home. Like, that's true home. That's real home. And I was the prodigal son that just ran, but I stayed. And at 23, for a few years, what I did is I prayed once a year. At the end of the season, I would pray to be a good little Christian boy. Lord, do you want me to continue racing my bike? And cycling to me was my complete identity, complete fulfillment, significance, all I knew, my friend group, everything. It's been doing what I did since I was 12 and at a really high level. And I prayed in 2007. I was about to graduate from the University of Georgia. And I just prayed and just like, all right, Lord, I have my contract in hand. Lord, do you want me to sign this contract? And shortly thereafter, I say it was one of the first times I really heard, quote unquote, heard from God in prayer. And it was this deep seated conviction that the answer was no. I don't want you to sign the contract. And so I took some time. I'm just like, okay, was that me thinking that? Was that just like this thought in my mind that was me, or is that something outside of me? And it haunted me for about a week. I couldn't sleep, and I just kept thinking about it. And it was no. And I finally caved, and I called my team manager and said, I can't sign the contract. I don't want you to ask me why. And and this guy doesn't know Jesus, doesn't know, and I'm not really walking with the Lord at this point, as I mentioned. And he's like, you realize, Todd, this is maybe the only thing you're going to get. And I turned my contract down. I'm sitting in my apartment in Athens, Georgia, about to graduate. Like, I had a degree, but I had no intention of like going to the quote unquote real world or get a real job. And I said, Lord, like, I just gave you my life. Like, this is everything to me. And I kind of tested God, which is I would not recommend doing this, but God's grace and mercy, he was gracious to me. And I said, Lord, you have to show up right now. If you really wanted me to quit cycling, and I maybe just did that 5 minutes, like right now, and bawl my eyes out, I was like, you have to show up for me. You have to show up for me. You have to show me that you're not just some figment of my imagination. You're not just up in some la la land in heaven and I'm down on earth doing life and it's messy and broken and gritty. And like, I don't know which way it's up. And I feel like I'm praying to you and it's just a brick wall. Like, you have to be real to me. And my phone rings. And I was like, Lord, you just have to show up. Like, you have to do something and show me that you're real. And my phone rings. Still crying, don't recognize number I didn't recognize. I don't even know why I answered, but it was my roommate at the time at Georgia, his older brother. And he says, hey man, it's Matt Nolan here. I know you're roommates with Dave for years. And I wanted to ask you, dude, I know you're graduating soon. And I just want to see if you're still racing your bike next year. Because I put your name down about the past year about somebody I'd love to work with. And I'm launching this company in Florida and I'd love for you to join my team if you're not racing. I said, dude, you offer me a job right now? And he says, well, sort of, like, so what's going on in your world? And I said, I literally like 5 minutes ago, just turned my contract down and I have no idea what I'm doing next in my life. And he's like, wow. All right. And this guy loved the Lord. And God provided me a job for 5 years where I worked with this guy in a for-profit company, all believers at that time, that the mission statement was kingdom building through leadership development of young men to change the world. And the goal was this for-profit company internally was about discipleship and mentorship. And so I got to start discipling people I was poured into. And coming from cycling, I met one Christian in 12 years of racing. So I was always around non-believers every single day of my life. And so to kind of walk into like this with a bunch of believers, a bunch of young guys doing life on life with was amazing. But I just, that day, I resurrendered my life to the Lord. Wow. I was like, holy smokes, like, Lord, that was amazing. I said, Lord, all right, you have my life, take it. Like, I'm tired of running. I've just been running so hard away from you. I'm so sorry. Repent. So I just like fully repented. And I like wholeheartedly just like, God, take my life. Like, you can do whatever you want with it. I'm done. And it's kind of as like that end of your rope moment. And I just truly surrendered. And man, my life just like, it was unbelievable. Sin issues I was dealing with for 12 years just like stopped that day. God just started doing wild stuff in my life. And then shortly thereafter, it was like really impressed me to go and start a ministry in cycling. And so for 5 years in that company, I met my wife in Florida, and then started working and going back to races, paid on my own dime, and just started to kind of re-engage a little bit with cycling, but from a ministry standpoint, and then joined AIA staff, Campus Crusade staff in 2011, about 4 years after that. So
it's cool. Yeah. And one of the conversations leading up to our interview with Ben King, which was awesome. I didn't know Ben from, and he didn't know me. And I shot him a message over Instagram and he's like, yeah, I would love to have a conversation. And so we really enjoyed talking with him, but I texted him afterwards. I asked him, I was like, what is it like as, in a predominantly international sport like cycling, to be a believer? Like, how do you experience community when, especially for a guy like Ben, who's in Europe, right? You're saying, he's racing and living in Europe, and like, he's very much a minority. How do you experience community and find any like accountability as a believer and walking? Cause like, you're kind of you may be the only English speaker on your team,
right.
possibly. And that's when he shared with me about his friendship with you and the work that you're doing. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you guys as you build community and work with these athletes, these pro cyclists in general, because it's a different world than, say, football players. There's a whole set of struggles and issues and problems in cycling that you're not going to experience in other sports. It's very unique.
Yeah, I think kind of how our ministry has looked and shaped is we try to gather them together. And to be honest, when we first started, I didn't know if there was any Christians even out there. And we gathered we would call it the first chapel in pro cycling back in 2010 at the US Pro Championships, US National Championships. And Ben was one of those guys. He was like 21 years old. And there's 5 guys that showed up at the Starbucks, and they all knew each other, and like, dude, are you here for this chapel thing, this devotional prayer time? I'm like, yeah. They're like, dude, I've been racing with you for 5 years. I had no idea you're a Christian, And we had this awesome moment together. They had this big epiphany that they're brothers in Christ. And then Ben goes and wins the next day, becomes the youngest winner ever to win the U.S. national title at that time.
That's awesome.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And so I left my job right after that. I said, all right, Matt Nolan, that guy who called me that day, we were leading this business together. I was like, man, I want to do this full time. And so what we started was with there's 4 guys. We started a virtual Bible study that started in 2012. I would travel with my wife at the time. This even before kids. And we would go to events and races, host chapel service, I would call a chapel service like devotional. And I don't think of church service, like worship, praise and worship band. Yeah. It might be in a hotel bar,
Right.
Like real casual, and just where we could meet, coffee shop, whatever. And we pray together. I'd bring the word and some just nugget for them from God's word. And yeah, we just have a time to connect. And then we would have, and then I would disciple them. And so what's happened over the past 10 years is our staff team has grown. We live in the Boulder, Colorado area, which is a really big mecca for endurance sport and specifically cycling. And so now we have a number of riders from all over the world, from mountain bike, cyclocross, road, downhill mountain biking, gravel racing, guys and girls involved, that we have a weekly Bible study that we do. And then our staff goes out and disciples these people. And then we travel the circuit, doing services, basically at races, doing outreach, serving teams, build a relationship. I believe ministry is strictly just about relationship. You got to have, and with elite sport as well, you have to have a relationship. You can't just like walk in and just say, I love cycling and I love Jesus. Like, hey, let's go get coffee, right? Or let's go ride together. They're going to be like, who are you? What do you want from me? Because everybody kind of wants something. And so you say, right, I don't want anything from you, man. Like, I care about you off the bike. I care about you as a person. Right. And just how things have changed and grown. It's been pretty remarkable. We'll have a small group. It's not like we have hundreds of athletes involved with us, because the cycling world, like I said, I'm from the deep South and Bible Belt, and Tuesday night group ride to a Saturday morning ride. Doesn't matter if I was a 45-year-old guy, 50-year-old guy I'm riding next to. I never once had a spiritual conversation. Mm-hmm. Never once. I met one guy who was in mountain bike racing, and I was, that one person my entire career. And so that's the case a lot of times. Is like, I'm the only believer on my team. Like, I'm the only guy. I'm the only girl. And so we are the ministry that gathers those people together to be able to, one, encourage them. They're always racing on a Sunday. There's no opportunity many times to go to church. Right. If they're in the U.S. and they have a lot more avenues to do that, we're pushing them to the local church. Hey, man, what church are you going to? Like, we want to push you to that. But in general, when the race season is full on, it's like maybe that Wednesday morning study we have is maybe one of their only opportunities for them to be spiritually encouraged during the week. And so that's kind of where we fill the gap We fill the gap with where no one is going there. We're the only ones. So we are the only ministry in professional cycling. There's no FCA. There's no anything. It's just us. So
how do people get involved in Athletes in Action, with the pro cycling? I mean, that seems to be, I know that we have a lot of friends who listen who are cyclists, and and they may be interested in being a part of that somehow.
Yeah. So I mean, our niche and target is pro riders, and so it's hard to bring like volunteers into that. Like you can't just like show up to some race and hey, let's, Todd told me to come talk to you. So in general, like what we say is like how you can really help is partner with us. So like specifically for our family, I mean, I'm sending it out next week but restarting this huge, massive fundraising goal we have in order for our move to happen. We got to pay, socialistic European taxes when we move to Spain. We got to buy a car. We got to rent a place. We've got to do all this stuff. And so, we say, hey, can you pray for us? Like this is to be honest, like cycling, this ministry is like an unreached people group.
I was just thinking that. I mean, essentially that's what you described as an unreached group.
So like no one's doing this, like the sport has been around for over 100 years. So you think in American sports really old, like cycling just trumps a ton of sports in terms of the legacy and how old it's been, but there's never been anyone doing we call it chaplaincy ministry. Like I would consider myself a chaplain. And yeah, we're the only ones doing it globally. And so if people want to get involved with this, like, hey, if you want to partner with us financially, that is massive. Like AIA doesn't give me one single cent. They give me the resources, the training, all that stuff, but we have to raise it all. And then for prayer, like it is a really challenging culture. Fruit doesn't seem always that obvious, like the spiritual fruit of what we're doing doesn't always seem obvious. There's just moments, like I've had some amazing moments this past month where I'm just like during the pandemic, I'm just like, man, we're home. We can't see these people. Everything's just virtual. And it was really discouraging. In the past month or two, I've just had some amazing stuff that's happened where I'm just like, all right, God, you're like so faithful to us. Like you've never left us. You've gone before us. And so, just for prayer, like we just need people to pray that God would do something remarkable in the sport. And then in Girona, where we're moving, there's like 200 pro athletes, 200 plus pro riders. Many of them are married and families. And so just we pray, and it's multinational. Like we pray that the Lord would create a spiritual movement in Girona that then goes and spreads globally across the world, thanks to that strategic location where they live. And so that's our one of our prayers.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, that you were saying earlier, from a physical standpoint, I mean, these guys crash and they get back on their bikes. I mean, they're just mentally, hard people, to be able, the capacity to be able to get it back on your bike with broken elbows and finish a stage in the Tour de France is unimaginable for most people. And so I would imagine those would be some, from a spiritual standpoint, very high walls, to break into, as a chaplain, because we've been having this conversation with our men at the church that I serve at, is vulnerability. It's like, we don't want to be vulnerable because that may be weakness. Right. And so we don't want to show any weakness, and so I'm sure that's incredibly difficult with pro cyclists, and a very unique breed of people that do that.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, we're all self-reliant, right? I don't care if you're a pastor or you're a carpenter, you're a consultant, you're a pro cyclist, a pro athlete. We're all self-reliant. We think we can do life without God. And so, but cycling in particular, it's such a scientific, it's kind of an individualistic sport, even though it is a team sport when you're racing. But individually, you're riding by yourself, training 6 hours a day in the rain, whatever, any weather. And you just look down and you see how good you are and how good you're not. And often it's like a really simple formula. It's like how much I train, what I put in my body and eat, how I recover. A plus B equals C. like, Todd, this is just how it works. So you're telling me there's another factor of faith, or there's this God that loves me and cares for me and actually has a plan for my life? And dude, like, faith in my sport is like, no, that's not like possible. Like, why would in the world would I have faith? Like, it's really simple. Success equals these things. And that usually that worldview breaks down when they have the injury, when the contract doesn't come through, when they thought they control their world. And we all do this, right? So we all try to control as much as we can. So when that falls to pieces, that's when they go, huh, yeah, I didn't really realize that maybe my world wasn't as safe as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe this whole God thing or faith is maybe something that's real. And I need him, I need something. So.
Yeah. We usually close our conversations by asking this question. Todd, what's your next adventure? However, given that you're trying to move your family with 4 small children below the age of 7 to Spain,
we got a pretty good idea.
Pretty good idea.
Yeah.
What that next adventure looks like.
Yeah. That is, we tell our kids. I was even like last night was telling them about something God did for our family yesterday. That was like just unbelievable. It was one of those days. It was just like, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. And I wanted our kids to know it. And I said, God did something for our family yesterday. That was so remarkable. And I want you to know this for the rest of your life. And I said, God has an adventure. I believe the faith and Christian life isn't boring. I thought it was like why I walked away from God, and faith was just like, I just thought it was just rigid. I just thought, God's kind of a buzzkill. And I just invest in our kids, saying like, God has this awesome adventure for us. And yeah, our adventure next is moving. But I didn't mention this, but it's our oldest son who's 6, about to be 7, Logan. We've spent 2 months a year in Girona, Spain as a family. Last year we had to fly back right as the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So we were only there for like 3 weeks. We're usually there for 2 months, from February through April. But it's a special place to us. And so, but we fully know that it's a little bit different it's actually very different than just showing up to some Airbnb for 2 months, but living there full time is going to be a massive endeavor and a massive leap of faith, but we believe it's going to be an awesome and fun adventure. And so
you're brushing up on that Spanish, bro.
Yeah. Well, they speak Catalan there. It's like a unique.
Is that on Babbel? You got Babbel?
Oh man, I've got to start. Like, people go, dude, you speak Spanish, right? Like, you're moving to Spain. I'm like, well, to be honest, there's not even any Spanish riders that live there. It's all Aussies, Kiwis, guys from the UK, Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Americans, Colombians, like Africans. Like, it's just
any Belgians.
Belgians live. I mean, it's just other amount of riders that live there. But to be honest, you can get away with not speaking much Spanish, other than when you are Catalan, other than going to the market and stuff. And so I know enough.
So you gotta order your food. Through. You gotta pay your bills.
Exactly. But moving there and like paying taxes and getting an accountant and doing extracurriculars for our kids and being able to speak with other parents or with the teacher, there's just going to be this like massive difference.
Wow.
So there's no, like, I can't just play the ignorant American card right any longer. So that's the next adventure for the Henrikson family is moving there, Lord willing, at the end. Yeah. The beginning of 2022. So.
Yeah. That's fantastic. We'll put a link in our show notes to how people can get involved with athletes in action and the ways that they can give that way if they choose to be supportive of that. And man, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a rich conversation. And Brad, I know that Brad is a cyclist and he follows all of these guys that you guys mentioned. But for me, as not being in that world as much, this is fascinating and I love it. And I love to hear your heart. And I think that people will be encouraged by this.
Good. Well, it was great to chat with you guys. Yeah. And keep going. So I love the idea of your guys' podcast and I love being outside. Like, that's what I love about the sport of cycling, is just being in God's creation. And so just everything related to that. If I were bringing the Lord into that type of conversation, and God, people experiencing his creation and how it just opens our eyes to his goodness and creativity. So
yeah, there's nothing quite like bouncing on two wheels outside either, though, right?
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
And it's my favorite way to see anywhere, is to go for a bike ride. So
absolutely,
it's one of my favorite for sure. Well, man, we're so thankful, like Brian said, that you took time to join us, and we're going to join in praying for you as you make that move and all that comes with that. That's a lot of work, coming up. It's also super exciting. So we know the Lord has clearly been at work and is in at work, and so he's not going to not equip you. So what an adventure that'll be. We can't wait to maybe reconnect with you and hear some stories about what's going on in the work with your work in Spain.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're thankful for those that listen too, man. We do this and we have fun doing this, but man, there's some faithful people that listen and share their own stories, and have been really gracious to leave us comments and to leave us reviews. And so we're really thankful for those. So if these conversations encourage you and challenge you, please take time to leave us a review on whatever your listening platform is, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify. Leave us a review. And we hope these stories encourage you and challenge you, and maybe encourage you to write your own stories and share your own adventures in the storied outdoors.